So if we, there may be extra folks, but if you guys feel like you want to kind of circle up closer, feel free to. So I was on the East Coast last week and doing a workshop on Buddhism and tarot. I think I had mentioned that the week before. And I hate autumn. I really hate autumn because I'm, like seasonal affective disorder. My birthday's the day after the summer solstice, so I always feel like this is a slow decline after my birthday into the Avicenna hells. It's like that sense that the light is dying. And so this time of year always kind of fills me. It's very much like that Zen notion of suffering, that there are two darts that wound us. There's the injury, and then there's the second dart, which is our reactivity to the injury, right? So it's not just that the fading of the light gets me, it's that my feeling about the fact that the light is going to fade. It's just going to get darker and darker. And then I was back east, and it was like New England fall. And I remembered, and I grew up in Chicago, which is more New England-y than here. And I was like, oh, right. And it just reminded me, it popped me back into that reminder about the vitality of this time of year, which is true here too, even though we're north and it's dark and it rains and it's damp. But that vitality, which, feels like the shoring up of power, of not power over anything, but that power of life. It is a season that is really great for talking about virya, vigor, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks. But just that reminder that, to stay connected to the vitality of the seasons, and to be curious about one's own aversion. Anyway, so it was great to be back east. But I did miss you guys, and I missed getting to hear Jacqueline talk about that koan. And were all of you guys here last week? Or
I was.
Okay, Dylan, you weren't, but you guys were. So I'll bring our attention to that koan and another koan in a few minutes. Just kind of go through some of that material. Yeah. So I want to talk about the way of dreams a little bit tonight. We tend to think about the paramitas, these 6 or 10 in earlier forms of Buddhism, kind of virtues or qualities, ideals. We tend to think of them, I think, as items of good character. That's, I think, a phrase that Rafe Martin uses. He uses it in quotes because it's a traditional phrase. That we tend to think of them either prescriptively as kind of virtues or attitudes or habits that we should or that we do want to exhibit. So this is what we should, like that prescriptive idea. Generosity is good. I want to be more generous. Right? Character habits that we want to cultivate, that kind of prescriptive idea. Or we often will think of them descriptively as habits of the heart that describe, a being who is more awakened than we are, right? Or us on our best moments, or a being of awakening, and a bodhisattva, or the Buddha himself, right? So that kind of split between descriptive and prescriptive, that tends to be how we think about these paramitas. Does that make sense? Right? That they're both something that's like, this is a good thing to do, and it also is actually a description of if we were. They're not just things that will help us be more awake, right? Help us be more expansive, help us be more in tune with all beings. They are those qualities that you exhibit if you are in tune with all beings. So that prescriptive, descriptive side, that tends to be how we think about it, and it's a very, very helpful way to think about things. First of all, does that make sense, right? But I want to talk with you all and work through with you guys the way in which the paramitas are, I mean, that's true, but that they're also the stuff of dreams, that they're kind of, I was going to say describing, but I don't want to use that word because it's confusing since I just used it, but they're kind of laying out, there we go, that's a better phrasing. They're laying out a path of dreams, that we know paramitas through things like stories, examples, images, right? Through the depictions of icons and ritual, that the paramitas are not rules. Prescriptive, descriptive, that sort of sounds like we're talking about rules. They're not rules. They're not precepts. They're ideals, which means that they appear to us in images and examples and stories that inspire us. They appear to us in dreams. To encounter them, right, to learn why they appeal to us, to encounter them in their richness, that requires us, I think, to step back into the things that we don't know. So one of the things that, did you guys all get that, the handout I sent? One of the things that Martin says in his intro, which I think is really beautiful, he quotes Yeats. He actually misquotes Yeats, but that's okay. I'm just happy he quotes Yeats. He says, he quotes the Yeats statement that in dreams begin responsibility. In dreams begin responsibility. He says, it is out of the imagination that we create our real lives. Athletes know this perhaps better than anyone. If you want to swim better, you visualize yourself in the pond, the water flowing smoothly past, the chiming, churning sound of that flow, the kick of your legs, the perfect, effortless stroke, the echoing sounds of the tiled pool, even the smell of chlorine. Do it over and over, and when you get in the real pond, you swim better. What happens in the imagination changes us, makes us who we are. In dreams begin responsibilities, says Yeats. Why don't we teach this to our children? Why don't we take the time to train the imagination, not just the intellect? One day, hopefully, we will. We may have to. For by dreaming well, we live well. Well, I'm wondering if that makes any sense, like how the imagination helps us live well. I mean, he's talking about like that sort of like athletes rehearsing stuff in our dreams, but there's a way in which, you know, if we go more deeply into the imagery of our dreams, of our imagination, the stories, the icons, the examples, the inspiring little nubbins that come into our inbox. I subscribe to something called the Post Optimist, which is the Washington Post's like good news newsletter. And, you know, it'll tell stories about, look at these wonderful people and what they did. But those sparks, right, for our imagination, that somehow that, it's not just that we dream away things when we get scintillated by that stuff. That's actually where our sense of responsibility arises from. And I was thinking about this in sitting Zazen tonight when I woke up. But have you ever had this experience where you sit Zazen and something emerges out of you know where not? You know, like a thought or an idea or like something clicks into place? Have you ever had that experience? Yeah?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all the time. And I feel like I'll often drift into, like, I'll have something really profound, it's like a phrase, it could even be like 2 words pop out of nowhere. And then I'll bring myself back to my breath because I could easily go too far into the imagination zone, dreaming zone and stuff. But definitely, it's really nice when that just pops up and then it goes away again.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and so there's a thing that can happen where our minds are drifting, right? There's also this thing, and I think, I have a feeling this is I did talk to Jacques and I connected with him, so I got a sense of a little bit of what you guys talked about. But I think this is also something that he may have broached last week. But, you know, when we take the posture of Zazen, right? This posture that's about neither left nor right, neither forward nor backward, where we find ourselves over our hips where we drop anchor and feel the center of the earth, which I always think this is miraculous, that no matter where I am, the center of the earth is actually directly beneath me, right? We live on a globe. It's so cool, right? But our gravity reminds us of that centering and that ability to kind of be absolutely coinciding with ourselves. Do you know what I mean? Like just to like, boom. So one of the images about Zen, Zazen that gets used, it goes back to, I think it goes back to Sekiro Kisen. It goes back to the same ancestor who, there's a quote from him on one of our handouts. I'll pass that in a second. But Dogen quotes it, but the idea of taking the backward step. Hojo-san's talked about this a bazillion times. Taking the backward step, right? I always think of that as taking the backward step is actually stepping back into the center. I'm not pushing left. Well, that's right. I'm not pushing right. I'm not pushing left. The other left. I'm not grabbing. I'm not pushing away, right? I'm not trying to leverage the experience of this life to make something happen. When I settle into that not doing, when I settle back into my center, so things can happen, like our minds can drift and fantasies can come, but also like that experience of like an insight arising. I'll experience this sometimes when I go to sleep at night, like there's a problem I'm chewing on. It might be a problem at work. It might be an interpersonal problem, but something that I can't make sense of. And it's like standing in the corner and I just, there's like, I can't go that way. I can't go that way. I can't go forward. And then I fall asleep and somehow in my dream space where I'm not doing anything, that facing the wall becomes an opening. Is this a familiar thing that's happened where like, it's like, I can't, and then suddenly, precisely in those moments when we've stopped trying to figure it out, the doorway appears. That, I think, is this idea of in dreams begin responsibility, that in this place where the mind is alive, but it's not doing, something like a path forward can appear. So I think this is one of the ways. First handout. There will be more. And if anyone is listening in and you are not on the mailing list for this class, listening in, that sounds kind of nefarious. If you're listening in, if you're eavesdropping on the Dharma, just email me or email the office at Buddha Eye and I can send you the handouts. Oop, did I not give you enough? Dylan. Oh, my arm's not quite long enough. Okay. So, I mean, y'all know this guy, this bald-headed abbot here. This is, the image from our website of Hojo-san making that calligraphy. And that's the quote from Sekito Kisen from the Harmony of Difference and Sameness, the 8th ancestor, 8th century Common Era. If you don't understand the way right before you, how will you know the path as you walk? I mean, I think that centering in ourselves, right? There's something about the manner in which the path, the way appears, precisely when we're not pushing or pulling, right? Something about settling right here. And that is actually where we get the traction that these stories like the Jataka tales about the Paramitas, where they come to life in us, in that place where we're not doing, we're encountering. So this first koan, this was the koan from last week, and I'm not sure, I think Shakyamuni used this translation, but if it's a different one, I hope that won't be confusing. I'm wondering if someone will just read it for us. Thanks, Emma.
Joshua asked Nansen, "What is the way?" "Ordinary mind is the way," Nansen replied. "Shall I try to seek after it?" Joshua asked. If you try for it, you will become separated from it, responded Nansen. How can I know the way unless I try for it? Persisted Joshu. Nansen said, the way is not a matter of knowing or not knowing. Knowing is illusion, not knowing is confusion. When you have really reached the true way beyond doubt, you will find it as vast and boundless as outer space. How can it be talked about on the level of right and wrong? With these words, Joshu came to a sudden realization.
Okay. So what's being described here? And we've got this, I'll just start us off. We've got this question, which I think this is the question, right? I mean, this seems to me the heartbeat of a human life, where we reach these moments where, our awareness that things aren't quite what they should be, and our sense of our own suffering. I was talking about this in terms of the poke 2 weeks ago, the way that like something pokes us to do something as ridiculous as come to a Zen temple. Like it's a combination of, I'm not so happy, and a realization that if I'm not so happy, it's because I know somehow things could be better. Like something's not right. And then the next step is, what's the way? How do I find that, right? How do I find the path? And what should I do? This is the question at the heart of the Diamond Sutra, which I probably won't take us into tonight, but it keeps circling. I wanted to talk about the Diamond Sutra 2 weeks ago. I want to talk about it tonight. We're going to get to the Diamond Sutra. The Diamond Sutra is like, Myobun, talk about me. And we might get there tonight. But it's the question of like, hey, Buddha, how do I do this? And it's often the question that starts to really spark into life when we encounter that dream, that image, that icon of how it could be otherwise. So we see someone like Hojo-san, and we're like, how does he do it? How does he do it? Or we have a friend who seems like really grounded, and I'm like, what are they smoking? Because I want some of that, right? So in the Diamond Sutra, Subhuti asked the Buddha, what is the right way to sit, to stand, to move? Like, how do you do it? So in this koan, what does Nansen answer Joshu with? What is the way? Yeah, what does that mean?
Right now, in practice, it means the unembellished encounter. I don't know that I'm not, gosh, what am I saying? Yeah, since reading this, I've been chewing on it. And that's really what I've been feeling more. I tend to want to, I like when you leverage, I tend to want to leverage my experience or leverage my breath.
Yeah.
And it never works and it sucks. And I just beat myself up over it.
You're lucky, because for some people it works. It never works totally, but for some people it works, and they have like these bliss experiences as an early meditator, and they're like, I found it. So you're lucky if your leveraging fails. Just so you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It feels lucky. You don't have to.
Yeah.
It doesn't always feel lucky. When you say that, I agree.
So the unembellished noticing of your breath. Yeah. What do you mean by unembellished? Say a little bit more.
Letting it be simple or letting it be complicated. I'm talking about wanting to leverage the breath and meditation into an experience that feels good. I tend to assign greater reality to things that feel harder or heavier or more emotionally.
Right.
right now, the practice is there. I don't need to be having crushing existential moment to be meditating. And so just and really like I haven't moved my attention in my breath past right here because it's so much easier for me to keep this physical body sensation
Yeah. Why do you think it is that there's that temptation to say, I've got to be having an existential crisis?
Like fundamental distrust of the divinity of all things. You know, like I think rationally and in my heart, I want to believe that, and I want constituting myself as a spiritual person. But when it really comes down to brass tacks, just surface level experience of my mind thinking about all the things that I actually think, thinking about training responsibilities, things like that. Feeling like those are devoid of, like those aren't
the juice.
Right or wrong, right? Yeah. That can't be it. But this is it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great answer. Yeah, how can I know the way unless I try for it? The way is not a matter of knowing or not knowing. You know, one of the we want that feeling of interconnection. We are so deeply isolated. You know, I think that's, and our culture has that more than maybe as moderns. You know, it's like we've really perfected the art of alienating ourselves and each other. And yet we want to feel interconnected, but we want to have the feeling of interconnection. You know what I mean? It's like we don't want to lose hold of our spiritual experience. So, you know, if you think about, I don't know if that makes sense, but, you know, if you think about what it is to practice together with all beings and to imagine that movement of wisdom, of Prajna Paramita, who sits to the left of the Buddha on our altar, the personification of the perfection of wisdom, Prajna Paramita. There she is. The mother of all Buddhas is one of the designations for her, that origin of all that is known, which is itself not knowable, not because it's hidden, but because when you really step back to the center of things, that is the place from which understanding arises, but it's prior to that split between subject and object. Does that make sense? That's sort of big and out there, but at that place where everything is interconnected, how can I have that experience? Better to have an existential crisis than to be just simply paying attention to my breath. An existential crisis reminds me that there's something to chew on. It reminds me I'm here. It gives that kind of sense of, oh, I can leverage something here, right? There's something here to gnaw on. When I was in our first class talking about how, you know, in certain ways, it's not so much that the problem is that we like or don't like, that, you know, that sort of sense of hatred and aversion, hatred and desire. It's the way that we want to want things. We want to have that like grit, like, right? We want to have that sense of traction, right? We don't want to be walking the way. We want to feel ourselves walking the way, right? Keep ourselves in the position of the knower. But in the position of the knower, right, we're just in the position of suffering beings, completely ever continually perpetuating our dividedness from the world one step at a time. That won't free us. So how do we step back? The second koan here, and actually Hojo-san has written a beautiful article about this koan. I'll send the link for that when I do my little wrap-up email. This is from the Blue Cliff Record. And it's another exchange between, actually they're basically brothers in the Dharma, so it's not a teacher and a student, Dogo and Ungon. What does the Bodhisattva of compassion, what does the Bodhisattva of great compassion do by using all those hands and eyes? So that's the question that Ungon asks that starts off this koan. And Ungon is referencing the imagery of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion that sees Avalokiteshvara as having 1,000 arms, all that have eyes in them. So it's all these hands and eyes. And Dogo responds, it is like someone reaching behind themselves, grasping for a pillow in the middle of the night. I got it, said Ungon. I got it. Dogo asked, what did you get? Ungon replied, all of the body is hands and eyes. Well said, but it is 8 or 9 parts of the way, said Dogo. Ungon continued, I'm just this. How about you, brother? Moving through, responded Dogo. The body is hands and eyes. Now this is a koan that's about compassion, but it's also a koan that is about the ways in which compassion is the very soul of dana, that first paramita, the paramita of giving, of generosity, of responding to the world, giving ourselves to the world, meeting the world completely. Okay, so let me walk us through it. So the question is, why does Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara, why does the Bodhisattva of compassion have so many hands and eyes, right? And Dogo responds, it's like a hand reaching behind for a pillow in the night. So what does that image say to you? Reaching behind for a pillow in the night. If we think that the Bodhisattva of compassion is responding to the cries of the world, what's that about? Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, we're talking about things emerging in sleep time, but that feeling of like, do you have to wake up to get the pillow behind your head? Do you have to like think about it? Do you have to wonder, pillow, head, neck hurts? Do you have to like work your way through this complex sense of how to take care of your own head in your own bed with your own pillow? It's just an automatic gesture, right? Pillow reaching behind for this pillow. So I think the image is, placing a pillow behind your head because you need it to support you, right? So how is that an answer to what the Bodhisattva of compassion is up to? If I am trying to meet Wendy's suffering, she's so cold, right? She's so cold. Does she have enough blankets, right? I can I'll give you an example. I was on the plane coming back from New York. This is my diving into plane rides again post-COVID, and it's like it was completely packed. I'm sitting in the middle, and the woman sitting next to me at one point, and I'm wearing a mask because I'm like I'm gonna wear a mask the whole time. The woman sitting next to me was not wearing a mask, and she started there's just a lot of phlegm sound, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, okay, I've got 4 hours next to this woman, and then I realized, oh no, she's crying. She's weeping. And she kept picking up her phone in violation of FAA guidelines, and but that's okay. She kept texting somebody, and I could see out of the corner of my eye, it was an iPhone, and how when you're doing the text, it's blue. I could tell that she was just endlessly writing. Like she'd write something and she'd put the phone down and then she'd be sobbing and then she'd pick it up and she'd write some more. And I'm like thinking, girl, I've been there. Don't do that. Don't write another text. I mean, I had all my stories about this. But I was in such, I mean, I joke, but I was actually in such distress. Like, what do I do? Like, what do I do for this person who's crying? Like, do I, do I offer her a tissue? Do I say, I'm so sorry, are you okay? Do I ignore it because we're on a plane and the fiction is that we're all in our separate universes? What do I do? Counter that, and I spent like 2/3 of the flight not knowing what to do. And then finally I just said something small, like something like, I don't want to be intrusive, but I'm feeling for you and just hope things get easier. Counter that to a hand reaching behind the head for the pillow that the head needs, right? We're talking about, here, let me give you, we're talking about the second text, which is a koan about compassion, and also because it's about compassion, it's about giving. It's about the dana, generosity, paramita. So what's the difference between those two? Me belaboring, like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And does it make sense that there's a difference? I can't, yeah. Yeah. It's my body, right? I'm totally like I don't have to wonder. I mean, sometimes I have to wonder what I need in a moment. But isn't the whole posture that this posture of not knowing, this posture of settling back into the center, this posture of wisdom, okay? Of that being at the center of what could emerge as subject, object, ideas, world, but starts in just the total interconnection of all things. In that place, the hand reaches behind the head for the pillow. Does that make sense? So, Ungon says, I got it. And this is like us grappling with these images of generosity. This is an image of generosity. Like this is that kind of flash where, we just let ourselves sink into the encounter with the story, with the image. And then there's that moment of that flash where something does emerge. Some like, I got it. And Ungon said, what did you get? Tell me. I really want to know. And Ungon replies, all of the body is hands and eyes. Saying this bodhisattva of compassion, this example of generosity, the whole body is hands and eyes. What it would mean for us to meet the world completely receptive, open, responding, connected, the whole body. It's not just like, what should I do for this person? Here's a tool that I can take. It's like, I'm just responding. The unembellished attention to breath. I'm just responding. And Dogo says, that's good, but that's 8 or 9 parts of the way. So this is often translated, this part of the koan, as not quite right. You only got about 80%. But actually the point here is, that's good. You got what you got. And in fact, Ungon's response is basically, I'm good, brother. I got it. This is the beautiful thing about our grappling with these images of how to live a life in connection with all beings, how to live more wisely. The beautiful thing of it is like, how I'm inspired, like remember the Gal Gadot story, so she hears the trumpet player in Italy and she's like, it was pure, it was so powerful. I'm going to play Imagine with all of my friends. I'll do that. Like, she was inspired, she was touched, and responded, and her response fell flat. And yet, we're always falling flat. Our response, insofar as we bring it forward, insofar as we allow ourselves to be touched, it will be a full response. So, did I, like what I said to this woman, did that make a difference? I don't know. It took me a long time to just be real. I was real. I was real as Myobun. I was just me. So Ungun says, I'm good. This is what I got. This is my understanding. I expressed it completely. What do you have? Because other people's responses, like what would you do if a woman was weeping by you in the airplane? You missed the beginning of the story, I think. But what would you do? It's interesting. I want to know. I want to know what the Emma response is.
Literally?
Well, sure. Yeah, what would you do? Have you ever had a situation like this?
I don't know if I have. I imagine doing something very similar to you, just turning over it for a long, long time.
Like, am I interrupting, intruding? Am I violating her privacy? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Do I give her my card? I'm a chaplain, actually. I can help you with your What do I do? Give me a call. Exactly. But, it's what's wonderful is that these stories, these images that drop into our not knowing, when we let ourselves not know, like, what does this story mean? What do I do? I'm moved. I don't really, when we let ourselves drop in, and then we just give a complete expression, then actually what everyone else's expression becomes interesting too, right? Because it's, it's how Dylan's responding. And Kyle? No. Okay, it's how Kyle might respond. It's how Andy responds. It's how Wendy responds. It becomes like this is a sangha of people who are being inspired, right? So Dogo's answer, what he sees in this is, he says, moving through the body is hands and eyes, and that's a beautiful. It's like a slight difference. And how I read that is, it's not that the whole body is hands and eyes, it's that as we move through, we become hands and eyes. As we move into response, we become that which can respond, that which can receive. Hands and eyes. Eyes receiving light, hands reaching out. We become the expression of receiving and giving. We become the expression of generosity. So, not the back right now. Did that, I don't know if did that land? Did that make, let me just look at my notes because I know that I had, okay. Oh, I have gone, okay, well that was interesting what I just did there. So I want to give a little visual for the 6 Paramitas that kind of says a little bit more about what I'm describing. And this is actually, I learned this from Hojo-san, this drawing of this star, but it now has come to mean something, because of my work with tarot, it has come to mean, and my study of Renaissance, kind of alchemical imagery, this 5-pointed star. So there are 6 paramitas, but the 5 of dana, that's generosity, shila, and the right prong, that's morality or ethical discipline. We'll be talking about that next week. Kshanti in the right foot, that's often translated as patience or forbearance. Virya in the left foot is often translated as vigor or heroic effort. And dhyana is the Sanskrit word that the word Zen comes from. It means meditation. But, I see these 5, this star, as this is like a human form, right? And at the heart of all of this is the 6th perfection of Prajna. Prajna is what we step into in order to activate these human lives that move through the world, trying to regain our sense of connection with all beings. And the thing about prajna, again, that idea of going back to the source, does that make sense, that imagery of prajna as wisdom? That this is not the wisdom that holds content. This is the wisdom that is the source of understanding, which means it's prior to any concepts, ideas, right? It's just the sheer allowing of what is to be what is. We step into it when we step into the posture of zazen, or we sit back into it. The hymn to the perfection of wisdom that gets chanted here every other morning, there's a line in it, because again, this is Prajna Paramita. The perfection of wisdom is personified on our altar to the left of the Buddha. She is the source of awakening. She is the mother of awakening, meaning that it all comes back to that experience of interconnection. And one of the things that we say in that hymn is, she does nothing about all dharmas. She never produces any dharmas. Dharma here meaning, the word dharma can mean both like the truth, like the teaching, dharma with a capital D, but dharma just means stuff, like what is. And wisdom, the source of all of our compassionate action, doesn't do anything about anything. It doesn't leverage a darn thing. It just holds it. It's just like the black pupil of the eye that receives light. Okay, let me pause there. I've sort of thrown a bunch of heavy Zen stuff. And questions, comments. What the heck are you talking about, Myobun? Why is there a star here? What is this? Is this a pentagram? What are you doing here, Myobun?
Funny, I've been recently reading this book that focuses on sacred geometry, and it was talking about the number 5 and about how kids intuitively draw a 5-pointed star. Often, and like how it's like the number of like magic in a way. Five fingers. You have to
right.
And and the way that what you talk about, like with the way the body laid out.
Yeah.
It's almost like the 5 points are like the manifestation, where like prajna is before manifestation.
Yes, exactly. And prajna. So I mean, we will spend a whole hour talking about prajna. Like, that's so ridiculous. Prajna is like, it's at the heart of Zen Buddhism. What the trying to wrap our minds around prajna. But for now, it's sort of like a shorthand. Like, what are we talking about with this wisdom? We're talking about simply. We're talking about the ways in which any action in the world that is going to be healing, nurturing, liberating, has to be anchored in our willingness not to know. In that, like described in those 2 koans, in this place where, this place of ordinary mind, which is the sort of unembellished, I like that word, being with exactly what is right here. But it's just like the story of the Buddha, right? Of Siddhartha. Being with exactly what's here isn't just like living our life as it is, right? It's somehow about living our life as it is, as we strive to hearken to that part of us, that poke that knows that things aren't quite right, that we're off kilter. So Siddhartha, living in the palace, couldn't stay there, right? Couldn't stay there because even before he encountered what lay outside the palace, even while he was living in the, a completely contented, wonderful human life, something wasn't quite right. I mean, I think we can relate to that even in the moments when everything's good. There's like, something's not quite right. And so then he leaves and goes to Kapilavastu and encounters the truth of sickness, old age, death. He sees a sick man, a dying man, a corpse, and then that 4th sight that he sees, which is the sight of a sadhu, of a holy man. He's like, he encounters Ed Joe McMullen, and he's like, what? He knows something. And so he imagines, Siddhartha does, having had that encounter, that the answer is to really forego that sense of satisfaction and complacency that he associates with his ordinary life, and to try to do something extraordinary, which means pushing away all of that ordinary satisfaction. So he moves to that world of asceticism. But that's not the way either. It's not ordinary mind just like, and nor is it extraordinary, like I've got to do something different from a human life and get rid of this human life. It's somehow finding a way, as he does when he sits beneath the Bodhi tree, to settle back at the center where we're not grabbing on and we're not pushing away. We're just receiving what is. Andy, you look like you have a thought. No. Not knowing. There you go. You are inhabiting. Does this make sense? So that heart at that polygon, that pentagon at the heart of this 5-pointed star, that's the center. When we sit back in not ordinary mind and not extraordinary, but just right here. Right here. It turns out that's really kind of hard to do. And yet when we allow ourselves that settling in, we become receptive to things like the appearance of a sadhu. Right? So I want to turn us to this very concrete story from the Rafe Martin of the Buddha in a prior life, right? The story of the tigress. And I thought the story itself is really short, so even if you haven't read it, we can read it out loud together, because I think we may have to, I don't know if you have your copy with you or not, but we can just pass it around. And maybe what we'll do, this book, which is wonderful. So this is Rafe Martin has collected these Jataka tales, which are these stories that are really quite ancient. They're stories of the life, the many, countless lifetimes of the Buddha before he was the Buddha. And these stories show like every conceivable life, every conceivable act. I mean, the fact that there are like, 550 of these, more than that, I think, of these stories, just the sheer proliferation of stories is a reminder that like everywhere we go, there's a Buddha in the making. It's all Buddhas in the making, right? When the Buddha woke up under the Bodhi tree, his declaration, I together with all beings in the great earth awaken at this time, is a prediction of all of our Buddhahoods, of the Buddhahood of this glass of water. It's all going to be Buddhahood. It's all going to be Buddha. It's all Buddha. Saying we all wake up. And that prediction of Buddhahood, remember we were talking a couple weeks ago about what does it mean to be a bodhisattva, and what is the definition of a bodhisattva, and who is a bodhisattva, and are we bodhisattvas? The technical definition of a bodhisattva is someone who has received the prediction of Buddhahood. You, Wendy, you will be a Buddha. Andy, you too. Kyle, you too. Dylan, you too. Emma, I think so. And that prediction gets borne out in these Jataka tales as we see like countless lives, and they're all the lives that you can imagine. All of creation is carried in these stories of the Buddha before he was the Buddha. And so these have been teaching stories that have become the stuff of dreams and inspiration for this life of being a bodhisattva, a life of imagining our interconnection, a life of wisdom. Okay, so The most famous Jataka tale, the one that starts it all out, is this one of the tigress. And it is a story that is about generosity. And that seems really important. And that's why, dana, the perfection of generosity, is at the head. It seems like there's something super important that we need to grapple with first and foremost. And that is, what does it mean to give and receive? What is that about? That fundamental movement of wisdom that emerges in the act of compassion, in the act of feeding, in the act of nurture. Okay, so that's the tale. All right, the Tigress Jataka. And let's just go, we'll read like one paragraph at a time, and we'll just pass it around until we finish. Story time.
The tigress Jataka. Should I read it?
Just Dana Paramita, the perfection of generosity, or selfless giving, or Kuan Yin, reaching for the pillow behind her head. Okay, go.
Long, long ago, ages before the Bodhisattva became perfect enlightenment and became the Buddha of our world age known as Shakyamuni, he was born into a family of wealthy Brahmins.
He grew up learning the wisdom, rituals, and skills of his station. When he was grown, he was honored. Nobles saw that he had the bearing of a king. The wise looked up to him as a sage. Warriors and merchants felt he had the wisdom of a leader. He was also a naturally gifted teacher, drawn to guiding others along a path of selfless generosity, which in time he decided was his true calling. So he left the city for the forest, where he established a hermitage for those seeking to enter the higher life.
One day, years later, now a teacher, he was walking in the forest with one of his disciples. It had not rained for some weeks. The trees were bare, the grass spread all, and the stream bed nearly dry. Suddenly, they heard a series of coughing roars coming from somewhere very close nearby. The student listened and said, "Master, those are the roars of a tiger. A hungry tiger. You'd better go back now."
But the teacher said, "Wait a moment, listen again. Those are not simply the roars of a hungry tiger. They are the roars of a starving one. Let's go on a bit further and see if there's anything we might do to help." Reluctantly, the disciple agreed. In a short time, they came to the edge of a cliff. Looking down, they saw what was clearly a starving tiger. A tigress, actually, for two small cubs were trying to nurse from her. But every time they approached, the tigress roared miserably and drove them away. She was emaciated, just skin and bones, with all her ribs plainly showing. When she looked at her cubs, her eyes narrowed and seemed to glaze over. It was clear that in her desperation she had begun to view them, her own children, as prey, as meat.
Quick, said the Bodhisattva to his student, run and see if you can find some food for this starving animal. She may be driven to eat her own cubs if she doesn't have food soon. The karma arising from that will be terrible. I'll wait here and do what I can to stop her from harming her cubs till you return. And maybe just read the next 3 paragraphs all as one. Oh, sorry. Page 16, middle of the page.
The disciple ran off. The teacher watched him go and then turned back to watch the tigers below. How pitiful, he thought, watching them. Even as the Bodhisattva watched, he saw the starving tigress struggle to rise up on her 4 legs, hindquarters still on the ground. She tried again and again. At last she managed to rise and, growling and drooling, tottered unsteadily towards her tiny cubs.
Okay. My disciple is not going to be back for food in time to stop her now, thought the Bodhisattva. But I can't just stand idly by and let this happen. Mind is vast, totally empty, and cannot be found. This body, so much matter, is the crystallization of my own past thoughts and deeds extending back into the endless past. My deepest wish has been to save sentient beings. To fail to act when there is opportunity would only be a cause for regret.
He removed his robe and hung it on a branch of the tree. Then, like a man preparing to simply dive into a lake, he put his hands together and leapt from the cliff. Startled by the sound of something crashing through the trees and bushes behind him, the tigers crouched down in fear, then turned to look, and saw the bloody body of a man stretched out on the rock at the base of the cliff.
Gathering her remaining strength, she lunged forward and began to feed. When the disciple returned, apologetic and empty-handed, he saw the teacher's robe hanging on the tree at the cliff's edge. He called the teacher's name, but there was no response. Fearing the worst, he went forward and looked down over the cliff's edge and saw the tigers feeding. With a cry, the disciple threw himself to the ground by the base of the tree and wept. At last he rose, dried his eyes, and in awe carried the robe as a sacred relic back to the hermitage. Once there, he told the tale of their teacher's sacrifice to the other disciples. Then he led them all back to the spot.
There they festooned the tree with garlands of flowers. When the tigress and her cubs departed, the disciples all descended the cliff, gathered the bodhisattva's bones, and built a jeweled stupa in which to house them. The gods, stunned themselves by what they'd witnessed, descended to earth where the bodhisattva's body had been devoured and his blood shed, and covered the ground with precious incense, fine sandalwood powder, and heavenly perfume. Even now, the bodhisattva's selfless deed is remembered by those very gods and by humans too who know the tale. It will never be forgotten, even as long ages pass, in which high mountains and great civilizations rise and fall, never to be heard of again. All right, so this is what our tradition puts forward as the primary image of this movement of prajna in the world in the form of dana, in the form of generosity. What do you guys think?
Initially, I had some thoughts of what are they going to feed the tiger, and what about the karma of that? Is that being generous to whatever creature they're
Right.
gonna
And it's like, well,
right?
I will just dive off the cliff and feed her myself. So
I don't know. This is probably distracting from the point, but my other thought was he's this great teacher, and now he's the pride.
Yeah. 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 I mean, so we a tale like this is put forward to inspire us with a kind of what is established as a kind of ultimate example of giving. And then we kind of have to figure out, like, well, what part of this am I supposed to imitate this? And how do I imitate this, right? And it's like that Gal Gadot example. Like, okay, I'm moved by this guy playing the trumpet. It's so pure and powerful. I'm inspired to act. What do I imitate? Do I imitate that he's literally doing John Lennon's Imagine? So part of these images that come forward in the space where we're like, I don't know. I don't know what this is. I don't know what this means. Part of the way these can act on our hearts is because we actually figure out, like, what is the attitude, the posture, the mudra, that sort of, like mudras are, that's the word for these kind of gestures of the hands. What is the posture of heart, of mind, that this is embodying, that I'm supposed to get? Like in the koan, Ungan saying, I get it. It's about the whole body is hands and eyes. What am I supposed to get here? Is it that I'm supposed to sacrifice myself? Literally? Figuratively? What is inspiring me here? And so, Andy, you're with your question, like, well, what about he's a great teacher, he's depriving his disciple of a teacher. This is like the example of like, well, what do I do for this woman on the plane? Like that second guessing. Does she need her privacy? Does she need a gentle reminder of human connection? Like where we're like, I'm inspired by this moment. I'm touched. I'm called. How do I give? So, okay, it's an extreme story, but what if we allow ourselves to be inspired by it? What's the inspiration here? What is inspiring here? What is it teaching us about giving?
It seems like it's not. You're talking about the posture of heart. What I imagine as his posture of heart. It's not even conceived of as a sacrifice. It's not like a mournful suicide. He's sacrificing his body for the betterment of his tiger. Because I think in that framework, that's where all the questions of, what about my students? What about A, B, C, D? All the things that come up. But it's just the whole body reaching, like it's just an immediate movement that has no conception of gain or loss.
Yeah, no conception of it. There's not a measurement here. Like, is the karma of a tigress as important as his human disciples? So, what's motivating him is, I don't want this tigress to do this monstrous thing of eating her children, right? It's not that she's going to die. He's not trying to keep her alive. He's trying to keep her from committing a huge monstrosity. To me, that's, what do I want to say? Like, to me, where this story touches me is, and I'm thinking too about Sunday and the hungry ghosts and the ritual activity of generosity that we will be enacting on Sunday. To me, it's like, here's a tiger. She's already a figure, a predator. She's already kind of a fearsome figure. And yet, the bodhisattvas is touched by what? By like the idea that she might do something horrific. And in fact, the reason she might do something horrific is because she's not a human who might think twice about her children as meat. Oh, she is thinking twice about her children as meat. I don't know. I feel like there's something here about, how we might be touched by the fact that even this being over here can be pulled away from that kind of higher calling toward love. Does that make any sense? Go ahead, Anne.
Well, that does make sense. Thinking about it, I guess my automatic reaction is
Right.
but kind of, I think what made me think about the commentary later on about
Yeah, the guy who wrote The Little Prince. Yeah.
In how how plain
Yeah.
Because he's a national treasure.
Yeah.
So it's not, you know, and what the quote really resonates with me.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
it's always the same step.
Yeah, what does that mean? It's always the same step, but you have to take it. What is the step?
I don't know. It does resonate with me.
Yeah.
It's hard to articulate, but that's the sort of comes to mind is, you know, you have to be true to say yourself, but that sounds corny. It's not
No, it's
about yourself.
it's about your wise and awakened heart. So there's something in us that wants to save the tiger, not from death, because we're all going to die, but from something that's worse than death, like losing her wise and awakened heart. And I'm wondering, like right now, like what are some of the tigresses that we're dealing with in our world right now? Is there a tigress or a tiger in your, I mean, this can just be a question we don't have to answer, but is there in your world, either in your the smaller world of like the people you know, your job, your family, da, 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 or in the broader world that you encounter, are there tigers that we want to take a step toward as opposed to a step away from? Or that we have an inspiration to take a step toward rather than a step away from? That's also one of the, I mean, this is, to encounter this story is to ask questions like this, right? Like, what is the tiger? What is he saving the tiger from? Why is he saving the tiger? Why does he feel like he needs to save the tiger? There's this wonderful poem of Gary Snyder's that Rafe Martin also quotes, which is about this tale. So Gary Snyder writes, Buddha fed himself to tigers and donated mountains of eyes through the years to the blind. A mountain lion once trailed me 4 miles at night and no gun. It was awful. I didn't want to be 8. Maybe we'll change. Right? Like, that seems so true, right? Like, I don't want to give myself to the hungry lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Either the real ones or the ones that, you know, wear red caps. You know, I don't want to give myself to them. I'm sorry, I had to make a reference to MAGA because for me that's one of the tigers of our time. Like, I don't want to. And yet, like this has got me thinking both, I kind of have to, but what does that even mean? What would it mean to give myself to the red hat crowd? What does that even mean? It doesn't mean diving off a cliff so that they can feast on me. And it doesn't mean me flaming out, you know, on a Twitter feed so that they can have, I mean, what does it mean? But what does that mean? Some of it, I think, is as simple as no separation. We're all meat. We all are in this together. We all have wise and awakened hearts that are at risk of being dulled and numbed and deadened and all but lost. Right? I don't know, does this make sense? Yeah, and that there's something like, there's worse things than dying. There's forgetting that heart. And if the tigress forgets her heart, that affects me. If this person over here is degraded, allows themselves to be degraded or finds themselves degraded, loses their wise and awakened heart, that affects me. So how does that insight arising from the story, how can that become something that I hold with me and live with me through all of the very simple questions like, do I give a panhandler money? Like the more conventional questions about generosity. Do I give to this cause? Do I volunteer my time? Do I build a bridge? Do I work really hard at the hospital? Like all the ways I can give and receive. How do all of those relate to the heart of generosity as it comes forth through the inspiration of something like the Bodhisattva and the Tigress? That's the opportunity to work with this material, right? To allow ourselves to be touched, to not know the answer, and to see what inspirations arise. Does that make sense? So we have far too little time to do this work together. We have more handouts than we need, of course. We still haven't talked about the Diamond Sutra. For another week, perhaps. I brought a tarot card. I will show it, but we're not going to look at it or talk about it. We have all this material. But if nothing comes away from this other than just the idea that, these aren't rules, these aren't precepts, this is the stuff of dreams, and allowing ourselves to be moved and touched and to ask, what's moving and touching me here? So for next week, I will send, tomorrow, I will send the second of the Jataka tales in this book, which is dealing with the heart of morality, the perfection of morality. So we'll be thinking about this, like the head is this spirit of generosity, right? And then we'll work on the arms, and then we'll work on the feet. And then we'll end up at the heart with our last class. Any questions or comments before we go? I hope this made sense, Kyle, coming in. You're like, did it? Sure. Okay. All right, along for the ride. We're all just going to ride this through. All right, so we will close with the Pali refuges. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami.